نفتتح الجلسة الثالثة لليوم الثالث واليوم الأخير. So this is the third day, and this session is about the Gulf relations with South America, with a number of researchers who will present their papers relating to the issues of the relations between Gulf countries and South America or Latin America. The first speaker, Dr. Nouf Alenezi, will be talking about the Latin America and the Gulf from the angle of the international relations, challenges and opportunities. You have the information about the speakers. She's from Kuwait University. She has a PhD from the American University of Utah. And I am very happy that our colleague at the beginning of her academic career is active in this conference and presents a scientific paper, and I'm sure we will enjoy her paper about the Gulf relations with Latin America. So she has 15 to 20 minutes. أود The three papers will be in English, and the translation is available.
Okay, I want to thank the Arab Center for arranging this intellectual and academic meeting that we have, and we are really in need for that. My paper is about Latin America and the GCC and the realm of the international relation, the promises and the challenges. I'll start by shedding some light on the argument and the hypothesis or literature gap that we have. This paper stems from the literature gap that we have in political sciences, especially in the realm of the international relation. Political scientists mostly examine the Latin America from comparative politics. Latin America studies have provided us with a vigorous contribution of several essential topics, such as democratization, dependency theory, populism, and democratic consolidation. There are relatively few works that examine Latin America from international relation perspective, yet it is mainly focused on the United States and Latin America relation. There are new realities and challenges that have been emerged and deserve greater academic observation. There is growing and promising research that we have examined in international relation of Latin America from different perspectives, such as the international relation of GCC and Latin America. In this, all right. In this paper, I tried to shed some light on examining the GCC Latin American multilateral and bilateral relationship. This paper tries to bring greater awareness on how to strengthening and deepening the GCC Latin American relation. I argue that there are three aspects of these relations, which are the diplomatic political aspect, economic aspect, and the cultural educational perspective. Throughout this research paper, I noticed that there is a greater emphasis on the diplomatic and political as well as economic ties more than the cultural and educational ties. I argue that it will be advantageous for strengthening the GCC Latin American multilateral relations if there is greater emphasis on the cultural and educational cooperation, which will foster another level of relationship. As a matter of fact, increasing the cultural and educational ties, which deals more with the society-to-society interaction, will increase the cultural awareness and strengthening the relation between the two regions. When I talk about cultural and educational ties, I mean increasing the number of the fellowship, exchange student, scholarship between the two regions and the Middle East, or especially in the GCC and Latin America, and establishing Arab centers and GCC or Gulf studies in Latin America, and vice versa, establishing some Latin American center in the GCC as well. we are really in need for those academic cooperation and cultural cooperation. I will focus on what have been accomplished and achieved so far in terms of political, diplomatic, and economic cooperation. First, as for the political and diplomatic relation, these relations have been manifested in several ways, which are, first, the number of the embassies of Latin American embassies in GCC and GCC embassies in Latin America. Saudi Arabia was one of the earliest GCC countries that has been open embassies in Latin America in the 70s. However, the GCC witnessed mushrooming number of GCC embassies in Latin America during the 2000s. B, a political position of Latin America in favor of the Arab GCC side. Most of Latin American countries take a political position in favor of Arab and GCC agenda, such as the case of the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Second Gulf War in favor of Kuwait's right, and the United Arab Emirates right with the conflict with Iran as for the island. In the Brasilia Declaration of 2005, supporting the Emirati rights in its island with its conflict with Iran. C, the last form of this cooperation or ties, the official visit that taking place between the two regions. The two regions have witnessed increasing number of official visits in recent years. For example, Brazilian president visit 5 Arabian countries, such as United Arab Emirates in 2003. These visits led to forming organizations that translate this cooperation. For example, two regions increases the South-South dialogue by forming OPEC and ASPA. As for the ASPA, there are 4 summits took place in Brazil, 2005, Qatar, 2008, Peru, 2012, and Riyadh in 2015. As for the economic ties, this cooperation can be examined on main 2 ways, which are A, the forming of organizations that increase the economic cooperation between the two regions. It started with forming OPEC, moreover forming ASPA, strengthening the cooperation between the two regions. ASPA tries to increase the economic and political cooperation as well. B, the increasing number of trade, which I mean by import and export. If we really examine some graphs that they have from 2011 and 2015, you will see in most Latin American GCC countries there is increased number of trade, import and export between most of the GCC countries. As for I want to answer an important question. What are the significances of the GCC Latin American cooperation? Why it's important? First, there is a theoretical contribution or significance, and there is a practical one. As for the theoretical significance, as I have mentioned before, we have a few works that examine Latin America from IR perspective. It is an academic contribution to add on this growing promising research that focus on examining Latin American from IR perspective. There are new realities and multi-dimensions relations need to be addressed in the field of international relations. One of the promising topics is GCC Latin American relation, as this paper tackled. B, practical benefit, economic benefit, increase the trade, economic cooperation, increase the opportunity for diversification of the economy. As for the political benefit, increase the international alliance in the international system for both GCC and Latin America. Advancing the Arab agenda in Arab-Israeli conflict, increase the South-South dialogue, adopting containment policy toward the Iranian expansion in the region. As for the recommendation, how many times we have? Okay. I would end my paper by shedding some light on the recommendation. First, we are really in need for diversification our economy, concentrate on the educational and cultural ties, increase the political ties between the two regions, and strengthening the economic ties between the two regions. Thank you so much.
شكرا.
Thank you, Doctora, for this paper. The second paper is for Alejandra Galindo, and she will talk about the approaches of Mexico and Brazil with regard to the Gulf, towards the Gulf, the professor is specialized in the relations between Latin America and Gulf countries and the Middle East, with a special focus on Saudi Arabia. She had many studies in Qatar, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia, and she has two publications about the relations between the Gulf and Latin America. And so we give her the floor for 15 to 20 minutes to do her presentation. It will be in English also, although she speaks very well Arabic language.
Shukran. As Dr. Nouf was telling you, we appreciate the fact that in this Gulf Studies Forum is open this space to talk about Latin American approach towards the Gulf. And also I'm very happy to be chairing this panel with two Kuwaiti scholars, because I often meet more Latin American colleagues than Gulf colleagues working on Latin America. And I hope that also is a sign of hope that further research is coming from this side, from the Gulf. And the topic of my research is how Brazil and Mexico approach towards the Gulf using economic diplomacy. And the aim is to understand if the use of economic diplomacy fulfills either the economic interest and or political interest of both countries. And also to evaluate if this current, as my colleague mentioned, is a permanent feature in the relations, or if we are going to see an increase or consolidation of the relationship between these two regions, of course, using the case of Brazil and Mexico. First of all, I'm just going to talk briefly of what is economic diplomacy. Then I move to evaluate in political terms the links that are between Brazil and Mexico towards the Gulf area. Then I'm going to show you a general picture of the trends in trade, especially from the 90s until 2015. And then, in a comparative way, I'm going to show you the difference and similitude that both Brazil and Mexico presents using economic diplomacy. First of all, economic diplomacy is the use of economic tools or leverage to obtain political interest, political stability, or as well power in terms of foreign policy of a country in international relations. But also is the use of political leverage to attain economical gains. So these are interlinked, politics, interest, and economic interest. And, excuse me, they encompass different types of diplomacy: financial, trade, commercial diplomacy. And they, of course, they are interlinked. Also, it's important to establish that different actors are acting in economic diplomacy. It's not only the state, but it's a network of actors that display an economic diplomacy, like multinational companies, association of business, subunits of governments that are looking for links between countries. And just briefly, because I'm not going into the history, but I'm just going to state briefly that in the 70s, Mexico followed a policy south-south orientated in terms of trying to recognize the letter that President Echeverria was presented to United Nations Assembly. And it was looking for support, and of course at that time were the first time that a Mexican president visited the region, and formal relations were established in most of the GCC countries, with the exception of Saudi Arabia. Well, what about this new phase? In this new phase, we have Brazil with 2 administrations. In contrast, Mexico, they are 3 administrations. But what is important, as my colleague Nouf was saying, during the first years of the new millennium, we have been witnessed an increase on the opening of embassies, trade, and this can be explained also for a big initiative presented by Lula da Silva, President of Brazil, with the ASPA gathering. And through his national project, Autonomy Through Diversification, it looks at different regions to increase its political leverage or political power in terms of international relations. Meanwhile, during Dilma administration, it focused more on the domestic challenges and reduced the profile in contrast to Lula da Silva. But nonetheless, a lot was achieved in terms of Brazil connections to the Arab Gulf. And in contrast, during the Mexican period, of course, we are saying, I think, the same as the Gulf countries, that we want to diversify our economy. Mexico depends about 80% of trade with the United States. But it was until the administration of Calderon as a president that the first steps were made. And we have witnessed the visits of the foreign minister for the first time to some of the countries in the region, the opening of embassies here, and then with the current administration, Peña, we saw for the first time after Echeverría visit that a Mexican president toured some of the Gulf countries, contributing to establish some new agreements, and at least I think this will make a good basis to start to enhance the links with the region. But what about these general trends in terms of commerce? Of course, I couldn't put all Latin American countries. They are just some significant countries, but you can see the level of increase that they are presenting since the 19, and then the change, the abrupt change towards the first decade of 2000. So if in the 90s, taking the Gulf countries as a whole, we have an increase from 3.26% to 13.21% in the new decade, or the new 15 years. And if we take only GCC countries and Latin America, from the 90s, it was more or less 6.32%, and it jumped to 15.46%. And the main trading partners are Brazil, that is the largest one, followed by Mexico and Chile. And during the last years, as you can see from this graph, Argentina and Ecuador are increasing their trade towards the region. Well, as Brazil covers most of the trade of Latin America towards the Gulf, it's around more than 60%, we can say briefly that the main products are meat, poultry, and beef, and the main partners are Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, and the percentage of the total exports towards the region is between 4.5 to 5%. In contrast, you will see Mexico exports, although you see a patchy figure here, it has some explanations that I can deal with that later on. But the main export products are manufactured goods like heating and cooling equipment, vehicles, telecommunication equipment, and the main partners are Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. And the total of exports towards the Gulf countries it's like 1%. It's very, very little still. Well, what about the tools? First of all, we have to say that in terms of structural factors, when Lula presented his project of autonomy through diversification, it counts with a solid base of support. Business association and the Bank for Development act in tandem with the objectives of Lula foreign policy. Meanwhile, in Mexico, this was not the case. There was some differentiation between business association and trade policies that the Mexican government wanted to implement, especially during the first administration. But then, as I said, during the second administration, in Calderon period, some changes were made, especially regarding the role of Bancomex and the opening of the first office for promotion of commerce. So in that way, it was a first step that allowed Mexico to become closer to the Gulf region. In contrast, also, we have the exchange of visits. This is a factor that influences the links in any relationship. And in the case of Brazil, of course, we have more visits at the level of presidential visits, ministries, and especially foreign ministers' visits. Meanwhile, in Mexico, it was only towards the second half of the new millennium that it presents Mexico some visits by the foreign minister. And in the this year, at the beginning of this year, we have the first presidential tour. So you can see the contrast between these two countries. Regarding the avenues, that is an important tool, or the theaters, Brazil counts with something that is very important and that it also was mentioned, ASPA gathering. So through these ASPA gatherings, they forge new aspects of the relations. They are not only focused on commercial, although in parallel there are the business meetings between the two sides of the countries, between the Gulf and Latin American countries, South American countries, sorry, but Mexico is not in. Mexico just rely on bilateral visits. And in terms of the Office of Trade of Promotion, as I was telling you before, it was established in 2007, and the first office that opened in the Gulf region was in 2007, and it closed 2012. And it has been reopening in 2016 in Dubai and in Qatar in 2015. Meanwhile, the Brazilian Office for Promotion of Trade, APEX, has been established since 2000. Okay. Well, also, there are some players that are very important and that can improve, enhance the relationships, and these are the Arab chambers of commerce. As you might know, Brazil counts with a big Arab population, is the largest in Latin American continent. And it was established in 1950, and it has a lot of activity. It has links with the government. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the chamber was established in the 90s, and it was thanks to the initiative of the Arab ambassadors at that time. And now it's cooperating with Mexican government, with the Office of Promotion, and it has around 66 companies that are subscribed to this Chamber of Commerce. Regarding the banks, as I mentioned before, the National Bank for Development in Brazil has a big role in promoting exports, because it has lent money, and it become a subsidiary holder of some of the companies abroad and some of the companies that are in the region Meanwhile, Bancomex is focused on middle and small companies, and it hasn't covered yet the whole companies that exist in Mexico. So the role is very focused and is less than the role that has the bank in Brazil. And regarding the presence of firms and companies in Brazil, from Brazil in the Gulf, we have several companies that has been established since some time ago. Meanwhile, some companies from Mexico have been established in 2007, 2008. Even, for example, Serrey, 2 years ago, that has been established in Saudi Arabia. So the presence of companies is still a minor thing, but eventually, with the signature of these agreements, more companies will come and establish in the Gulf. So with this, I finish, and after I give you all these aspects of the economic diplomacy, now you can figure out that Brazil fulfills the two dimensions of economic diplomacy. Political one, because it has a leverage, a very important leverage in the international relations realm. Meanwhile, Mexico is only focusing on economic terms. And I think that also with this new situation, that Trump winning the election in the United States is a good shaking of for the Mexican diplomats and the Mexican government to take the opportunity and to diversify the exports and trade towards this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alejandra, for your nice presentation. And we'll move to the third presenters, Alanoud Sabah.
Alanoud Sabah, and she will be talking about Brazil's GCC relations. And this paper will also be in English. And Alanoud Sabah, who is a PhD student in history from Pompeu, Fabra in Barcelona. She has the choice to speak either in Arabic, Spanish, or English. Alanoud has she obtained her MA from the same university, and she has some 9 years experience in international relations. Will you be using Arabic or English? We have no Spanish interpreters.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank you all for coming here and listening to the three of us speak about Latin American, Middle East, and GCC relations. And I would like to thank my colleagues who gave me a great introduction. And I would like to talk to you about my presentation about Brazil-GCC relations. And I would like to address two main points. Brazil's foreign policy in the Middle East is a general policy, and the GCC has become one of the most important blocs today as an aftermath of the Arab Spring in 2011. And Brazil is a rising power in the international system and is also a regional power in Latin America, as my colleague said, in Mercosur and BRICS. So I would like to link these two factors in the development of the relationship between Brazil and the GCC in the following order. Does Brazil have a policy towards the GCC? Let's find out. My research divides the cooperation into these fields: political, economical, and trade, energy, food security, military cooperation, other cooperation, and then I will head to my conclusions. Okay. As my colleagues mentioned, Brazil's first contact with the region started in 68 with Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates and Oman in 1974, and Bahrain in 1980. And Brazil's relationship with the Middle East and the GCC in specific started in the 70s with Brazil being the major oil importer of oil in the developing countries. It has been much affected by the Arab oil embargo in 73, which put Brazil in a position to support resolution 3379, which made it lose its equidistant position with regards to the Arab-Israeli conflict. In 1982, between the period of 82 and 86, Brazil was facing financial difficulties, which were called for some visits to the region. We had the Minister of Foreign Affairs visit Saudi Arabia in 82, and the Financial Minister of Brazil visit Kuwait and Bahrain in 83. Until the end of the 80s, Brazil remained dependent on Iraq and Saudi Arabia for about 60% of its energy. And it's important to mention that, as my colleague already mentioned, that Brazil also supported Kuwait with the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. And in the period between 90 and the 2000, there was no more real political issues. It was more of trade, and I would like to just move forward to President Lula. Well, President Lula had, as a Brazilian president, focused so much on foreign policy. So he sought to start a new transitional phase with the Middle East on one side and the GCC on the other side. And two of the biggest issues that Brazil tried to play a big role in is the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Iranian negotiations. And as Alejandra mentioned, he also founded the Summit of South American Arab Countries in 2004 and had a dialogue with the Arab leaders in Brazil in 2005. So, Brazil is one of the only countries in the world that recognizes Palestine as a country with the borders of 1967, and that happened in 2010. And to speak about the Iranian negotiations, as most of you already know, that Brazil tried to play a negotiation part with the Declaration of Tehran in 2010, which failed. However, Brazil remains a country that has a policy of dialogue and wishes to play a neutral, rather political dialogue approach with the Middle East. And then we move to the second phase, which is President Dilma, and she also shares the same foreign policy approach towards the region with the previous president. Brazil also supported Palestine's membership in UNESCO of 2011. It supported its membership as an observer in the United Nations, and as most of the other countries, it has a very strong economic relations with Israel, which was endangered after the Gaza situation in 2014, when Brazil demanded that ceasefire should happen as soon as possible. Okay, so as most of us heard today, a lot of our discussions, they want to know what are the big countries' role and their opinions about the current affairs. So we will move to a very, very current affair, which is the Syrian crisis. So what does Brazil think about the Syrian crisis? Well, it does, of course, support the Geneva I for political solution for the Syrian crisis. It welcomes the resolutions 2254 and 2258, focusing on the humanitarian aid and efforts of the United Nations to the Syrian people. It also accepts a number of refugees, as the then Minister of Foreign Affairs said that they will accept more than 7,000 refugees by the end of 2016. And according to a lot of press and media, President Dilma, before leaving office, have been talking to Russia about their military intervention and criticizing them in Syria. So we don't know where that's going between Brazil and Russia with the new leadership. As you all know, that President Temer now is the new president of Brazil, and his foreign policy is yet to be seen. With regards to Yemen, we have Brazil also supporting 2216, Resolution 2216 regarding the peace, the integrity and total integrity of the Republic of Yemen, and this was also readdressed in the ASPA conference in November 15 in Riyadh. So it's also important to mention that Brazil was criticized in the use of Brazilian weapons in the Yemeni conflict, as many of the media said that Saudi Arabia has used Avi Brass industrial weapons in Sana'a, and there was no real response from Brazil, but Brazil is trying to maintain its neutrality in such situations. Economy and trade. And since my colleague here spoke a lot about the Brazilian trade, I will make it as short as possible. So Brazil and the GCC's trade was not affected by the oil prices as much as others. Brazil has its own reasons of why the economy is not doing well. They had a big scandal and bankruptcy of Petrobras. It's the Brazil national oil company. Trade and commerce still remains at the core of the GCC Middle East and Brazil GCC and Brazil Middle Eastern relations. And as my colleague mentioned, the Brazil Arab Chamber of Commerce and Brazil Arab news agencies are the tools of the Brazilian foreign affairs to link both Brazilian markets and Arab markets. I don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but all 5 of the 6 GCC countries have an economic agreement with Brazil, with the exception of Bahrain. And Brazil has presence of 2 of its agencies in Dubai. One is the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, and Banco do Brasil, which is the National Bank of Brazil. Talking about bilateral trade, this year, first half of this year, the trade between GCC and Brazil has reached 4.5 billion, which is around 54% share of 55% of shares of the Arab world trade with Brazil. So the GCC retains more than half of the trade that Brazil has with the Middle East, or let's say the Arab world. And as Alejandra mentioned, that most of the products that have been exported from Brazil to the region are sugar, meat, poultry, dairy products, and some automobiles and pharmaceutical parts. 70% of Brazil's exports to the region are food in the food and beverages industry. And Brazil's imports from the GCC, 70% of it is in petrochemicals, oil, and fertilizers. So we can state that Brazil retains more than 60% of GCC Latin American trade. Direct investment. As we all know, that direct investments are not as big as anticipated, but the Kuwait Investment Authority has $3 billion US dollars in Brazil. UAE has 11, and this year Qatar Airways has bought 10% share of LATAM, the biggest airlines in both Brazil and Latin America. And there's a high competition with the transport industry in Latin America from the GCC. This is just a few of other investments that the GCC have in Brazil. And when we talk about Brazil's direct investment in the GCC, I will not go in deep in this, but most of what Brazil owns in stake is in the distribution of the supply of food and beverages within the GCC. It has shares in most, in Qatar, Oman, UAE, and Kuwait. And of course, the most important part of all is energy. And I will just go directly that Brazil imports around 27% of energy from the region, and most of it is from Saudi Arabia. And as for us, we only import around 5% of our oil to Brazil. In 2014, Qatar Petroleum Company spent around $1 billion to purchase Parque de Conchas oil project in Brazil. Saudi also has contribution in the energy sectors, but I don't have a lot of details about that. And the new cooperation that is going to start between the GCC and Brazil is the renewable energy. And that's because of economic diversification and the vision of Saudi Arabia 2030 and so forth. And I'll come to food security, which is one of the most important factors in the relationship. The GCC considers Latin America in general and Brazil in specific as a partner in agriculture and food security, because of its leading position in agriculture and technology, and of course, and because we are a growing population and the need for securing water and food is considered essential. The Saudi Arabian Agriculture Livestock Corporation, funded by the Saudi government, has purchased around 20% of Minerva, which is the biggest meat company in Saudi Arabia. And as we all know, in the Arab South American Summit, also sustainable development, food and food supply and security is one of the topics that all the Arab countries and Latin American countries share together. Military cooperation, Saudi Arabia has military cooperation with both United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia only, and as Brazil is known to have a good weapon industry and technology, it tries to train and sell their weapons to the region. I would like to continue to other cooperations. The GCC have education, culture, sports, and transport memorandums with Brazil. However, Qatar and UAE are the only ones who are pushing for more cooperation in terms of education and sports. Of course, Qatar will host the World Cup in 2020, and a lot of expertise are going to come from Brazil because it hosted the Olympics and the World Cup previously. And University of Qatar and the UAE both have language and culture exchange between Latin America and the region. And I also agree with my colleagues that there should be more culture and language exchange at the student level. Okay, so I'll head to the conclusions. I believe from my research that the GCC, or the Brazil's policy in the GCC is in its initial steps. Although our balanced trade is still promising, however, the two regions still don't know each other very well, and there are some barriers between language and legislative barriers that needs to be touched on many levels. Brazil is a stable economic and agriculture partner to the GCC. Both regions are oil-producing countries, and I would suggest maybe a trilateral cooperation in Africa as an example, since Brazil is also working in Angola, and also, of course, Asia. I mean, China is also working in Africa, but I'd rather that the GCC work with Brazil and some African countries in the energy sector. I would advise that the GCC would actually invest in Brazil's agriculture industry, maybe some military training and weaponry technology. Why not? Since Brazil has the technology and it doesn't have really political stance in many international conflicts, so it would be an interesting partner in that field as well. Brazil is known for its aviation industry and also has a little market in the region. And I call for more political, cultural, and economic dialogue for a better future, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Alanoud Sabah, for this presentation. The three papers discussed different aspects of Latin America's relations. Out of 7 papers, 3 speak about Latin America. Maybe Nouf Alenezi tackled this theme from the point of view of how to consolidate and deepen these relations. Alejandra spoke about the nature of relations between Latin America and GCC, especially focusing on Brazil and Mexico. These 2 countries happen to be the biggest economies. Alanoud Sabah focused on Brazil in particular and how relations between Brazil and the Gulf countries can improve and can develop. I thank them for your presentations and respecting the timeline. Now we open the floor for questions and answers from the audience. We start from Huda. Please just state your names and your affiliation. Then you can take notes about the questions directed to you so that you can
Good
respond
afternoon.
later.
Thank you very much, ladies, for those informative representations. My question is for Alejandro, because in the beginning of your presentation, you touched upon the South-South cooperation, and I wasn't very clear whether you are referring to the UN South-South cooperation framework or some other bilateral framework of cooperation. So this is my first question. Which framework are you were referring to? The second question is also about this framework. Do you think that the UN framework of South-South cooperation would be an suitable and effective umbrella to solidify the GCC Latin America relationships? And if it was so, how could it be utilized for this end?
Dr. Ibrahim.
Dr. Ibrahim Al-Hadban, Jamiat Al-Kuwait. All 3 ladies, are we in competition with the Israelis or the Iranians in Latin America concerning our relations with Latin America? Were they ahead of us to deal with Latin America? Are they better off? I mean, are they better, in their relations than the Gulf countries? If you have any idea. Thank you.
لديكم أفكار؟ هل لديكن أفكار؟ Dr. Abdul Hadi, you can ask your question in Arabic or English, Dr. Abdul Hadi. First of all, I thank the 3 leaders. I'll speak in Arabic. I want to hear some Arabic in this hall. And you spoke about, we want your colleague, the English-speaking colleague, to hear the voice of the interpreters too. You said Brazil can be an alternative or a choice for buying weapons. This is a very important aspect now in this area in view of the political conditions placed by the manufacturers of weapon systems. You said Brazil is probably the best in arms manufacturing in Latin America, but we do not know about the quality of it. In the Gulf, we are not concerned with the quality and how good they are in comparison to other manufacturers in Latin America, but to the world in general. In the Decisive Storm campaign, we had a huge need for weapons, and the American partner, as usual, they were trying to exploit the situation fully. How can Brazil change the situation in this regard?
Tim de Block, University of Exeter. Firstly, I thought all three papers are very useful and very good. And it's very important, I think, to have Latin America in a focus in this regard with respect to the GCC. I would like to ask, and this could be taken up by any, or for that matter, all of the three, is there any hangover from the very strong and very noble radical tradition in Latin America? I'm thinking in particular of Cuba. I'm old enough to remember the 1960s and the early 1970s and the kind of image which Latin America as a whole had, but especially maybe through Cuba as a supporter of liberation movements in Africa, and also with strong links to the Palestinians. I just wondered, I know that Alanoud talked a bit about Lula, and I suppose that picks it up a little bit. But is there anything more that one can say about it, that kind of impact continuing? Thank you.
Okay, shukran. Dr.
Thank you, Chair. Alanoud, do you want a question in Arabic or English? What do you want? We want to hear her Arabic voice, if possible. Alanoud, what is the position of GCC countries for the left ruling or coming to power in Latin America? Do you approve or not? Alanoud, what is the position of the Gulf countries vis-à-vis the left-reaching
power? More
than
one government in Latin America, leftist, Marxist, name it. Are they in support of them or disapprove them, or we maintain neutral position? So, the second question, what about economic crisis? In all Latin America, now economic crisis. So the Gulf state, what do you expect the future will be?
What is the solution? No, the increase in the Iranian influence in Argentina. Why? Is it because of Lebanese migration, especially in view of the fact that more than one explosion was carried out there, and the Iranian embassy was accused of being responsible for the deaths of many Jewish people? Why did you neglect Cuba, Olga? Can you repeat the question, please? نفس السؤال اللي طرحه إبراهيم. Shall I repeat it or not? ولماذا تجاهلتم كوبا؟ كوبا لديها علاقات طويلة بالكويت. Hatoun Al-Fasi from Qatar University. Thank you for all your presentations. Very useful indeed. Apart from that, they opened up the opportunities that the GCC does not seem to be utilizing as they should. I have a question pertaining to what extent do we have studying scholarships in Latin America from Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia sends students to all over the world. Alejandra, can you answer? Please, maybe you follow this matter. But the second tier of my question is to do with opportunities. Latin America has a cultural dimension in its relations with the first world, similar to our part of the world, the Arab world, insofar as their tendency towards non-alignment camps and affiliation and rejection of imperialism, etc. So there is a lot of commonalities culturally and politically. We do not see that being translated into practices in politics. The other aspect is the language aspect. The Arabic language is not utilized despite the fact that there is a large number of Arab immigrants living in Latin America. Fadl Abdul Ghani from the Syrian Association for Human Rights. In the first two papers, regardless of the title, even the third paper focused on the economic aspects. Alanoud touched upon the political relations. In fact, the most advanced political relations was by Brazil, especially when they took an honorable stand vis-à-vis Russia at the Security Council. I think South American countries have a good record so far as Arab causes are concerned, especially the Palestinian cause. And in my opinion, it's not that principled. For example, Uruguay and Venezuela are hypocritical, and sometimes they all voted against all decisions against Bashar al-Assad. I spoke to the Venezuela and Paraguay's positions are almost identical to the Iranian-Russian alliance. And this is important for the Gulf countries who support the Syrian cause, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain. Are there any other? Okay, now we give the panelists the chance to respond. We start from the opposite side now. We start with Alanoud. So far as what Dr. Abdul Hadi asked me about weapons, because what we're talking about is of a sensitive nature, I can tell you Brazil has a level of manufacturing weapons is no less than the level of Russia, and the GCC countries buy some weapon systems, and there are agreements for training and technical support. I cannot say they are of a secret nature, but I don't have information on them, and this is what we need. Secondly, Brazil does not follow Russia's or America's policies. They follow their own neutral foreign policy, which serves its own interest. Wherever their interests lie, they'll go, and it's one of few countries remaining in Latin America which still supports the Arab causes without negatively or adversely impacting its relations. أما بالنسبة للأزمة الاقتصادية, yes, Latin American countries rely on agriculture, and the Gulf needs food, whether we have money or not. Otherwise, where will we be feeding ourselves, whether oil prices are high or low? Latin American countries need petrol, the Gulf countries need food. So therefore, if it impacts us, it will impact them. Similarly to how it's likely to impact other countries. As for leftists coming to power, I think there will be changes in Argentina and Brazil too and other countries, but it will not have a negative impact on the economic or political relations. But this will not depend solely on the Latin American countries, but it will also depend on the way we present our problems and concerns. Do we do an adequate job of that? Do they understand what we're all about or not?
Yes. I will start with the first question regarding the South-South cooperation umbrella that you were mentioning and how it will become possible. Is what you... No, to this umbrella, to South-South cooperation, and how it can be implemented. I think, as Dr. Hatun was saying, we share a lot of things in common. We have the same problems. And, you know, if we can know more each other, I think it will facilitate the communication and cooperation. And I think from both parts, we have to be more active in knowing. For instance, I guess that most of you know more about Brazil than Mexico, because Brazil has a branding is a branding country, World Cups, and instead Mexico is not. So I think with more knowledge about our societies, cultures, it will improve. And I think that we have commonalities that we can share something, as my colleague was saying, in terms of food security, the way that we resolve problems in our countries, in terms of society and political problems. It can be shared. In terms of, we can do comparisons about the revolutions. And this is linking me to the second point, and I hope that I answer your question.
The expenses of the UN framework.
Yes,
so I was trying
because
to
currently
say,
it's
which
going,
would be more accessible to the
I think that you need
there.
both.
Oh, okay.
You need both, because as my colleague was saying, you know, regarding the policy towards Russia, Iran, the problems, I think it goes in both ways, and we don't see those exchanges. No, we don't see them. But there is going on cooperation, supporting, for instance, now the former foreign affairs minister now is in charge of climate change committee in United Nations, and it was supported by the GCC countries. So there is cooperation going on. And then regarding the question on how are the dealings of Latin American countries with Israel, okay, and Iran, I will say that in the case of Mexico, during we have a free trade agreement with Israel, but nonetheless, despite this trade agreement, since the 90s, Saudi Arabia became our first commercial partner and is increasing the level of trade exchange, not only with Saudi Arabia, but also with United Arab Emirates and Qatar. And I hope that it will continue. And regarding, and you were complaining that we didn't mention Cuba. And Cuba has been very active. I think from all the Latin American countries, Cuba was the first to establish diplomatic relationship with most of the countries. And in the case of Qatar, was the first Latin American country to open up an embassy here in Qatar. And I think that there is certain kind of romanticism about the idea of Cuba struggling against imperialism. And we can say that there is a link between these left-wing oriented governments in Latin America, and that they were somehow linking some international issues to support the case of Libya, Syria, in some of the cases, okay, to support the revolutionary movements. And there is a book very important that it relates to all these moments in the 60s, 50s, and is a book written by a Colombian colleague, Federico. I don't recall the surname, but he's working in Sayed University, and is published by a major published company, English published company, and is the revolutionaries and the history between revolutions in the Middle East and in Latin America, and the links, especially with Palestinian authorities, or Palestinian movement, sorry. And regarding the opportunities, the GCC opportunities, of course, Saudi Arabia has support Mexican students to study in Saudi Arabia. And we have an exchange, a diplomatic exchange with the Institute for Diplomatic Studies, but I don't recall any visit of Saudi diplomats being in Mexico for some programs. But yes, there are some exchanges. And also, one institution in Mexico had signed an agreement to have a chair on studies on Gulf countries, but it has become inactive. And I want to stress this. You saw the contrast between Mexico and Brazil. And I can explain by two factors. First of all, the geostrategic situation of Brazil is in the south. It has more margin of maneuver, and we are the neighbors of the United States. So it seems for me that this has a big impact, not only in terms of commerce, but in terms of our mentality, that we don't change our framework to see other possibilities. And I guess also that it is the case for the GCC countries, that they don't look to the opportunities offered for Asia, Latin America, and other countries. And I guess this is.
أعتقد أن هذا ما لدي لأقوله. Thank you. I would like to answer some of the questions, probably all the questions. First of all, about the foreign policy of Latin American countries, especially towards the Arab-Israeli conflict. I don't see the Latin American countries adopting ideological position. They are very pragmatic countries in their policy. more than it expresses imperialism or socialism or whatever other ideology. And then Venezuela, for example, is one of the countries which talks about anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, especially in the speeches of Hugo Chavez. But even though we could see the aggressive or hostile intonation in this speech addressed to the third world countries, the economy relations are strong and there is cooperation, although they still have the same approach as for ideologies. I hope I answered your question. For Dr. Shamlan, about the presence of Iranians in Latin America, I think that there are two reasons. First of all, Iran has an expansionist policy with regard to the presence in Latin America, and they want to work in the backyard and to exercise pressure to the United States from the south. And Iran wants also to get out of the international insulation, especially in the last 2 years, or except the 2 days. Dr. Hidman, about the Arab-Israeli conflict, the components of the relation between the Latin American countries is different according to the president, the ruler of the country. There are some who focus on the internal agenda and others are on the foreign agenda. But the main characteristic of these countries and their relationship with America until now in the Arab Gulf countries, although we want to increase our cooperation with them, but America, there is a focus on the United States from both sides. In Brazil, the economic factor is the one which made them go to the Middle East. This is my personal opinion. We still have 10 minutes if anybody has a comment or a question before to finish. There was a question about the Latin American role in the actual Syrian crisis. If somebody can remind us if they played a role even in economy. Another question. Jasim from Bahrain. My question is about Brazil. The situation in Brazil and the decision of the Congress against the president and plane crash. Is Brazil really influential? Can they have a positive influence in the Gulf area, or Brazil is busy with its own problems of poverty, etc.? For the question of Dr. Abtihal, I think there is support from some Latin American countries, and I think that some of Latin American countries are opening their frontiers to receive Syrian refugees.
Because, as I explained, Brazil has been in the region for quite a long time, and it has already established all these tools. They are working. And despite the problems in Brazil, I'm positive that things in terms of trade, in contacts, it will remain, okay? And regarding the problem with the Syrian crisis, I think that the countries, Latin American countries, and in the case of Mexico and in the case of Brazil, they have been very active in the United Nations Committee for Human Rights, and also in the Council of Security Council against very much of what happened in Libya and trying to avoid to happen in Syria, and the proposal of Brazil that a new resolution could come in terms of how to intervene in humanitarian terms and not to intervene in the problems of the country in question. Yes, and in terms of refugees, is what Brazil is the only country, together with Argentina, that they are accepting Syrian refugees. In the case of Mexico, they were only few cases.
For the question about Brazil and the political economic situation in Brazil, Brazil has always had such problems until Lula, and he was interested in the Middle East, and there was some change in the Dilma era because of the corruption. The new president has economic challenge, the worst since 30 years. He needs energy and he needs to diversify the sources of income. And the Gulf area is a positive choice. And there are over 4 million Arabs in South America, apart from the Lebanese. So they want to invest economically, culturally, not mentioning the modern institutions for the Latin America and Syria, as she said, but I am talking about Brazil in particular. Brazil is talking about the human rights and the humanitarian situation in Aleppo, and they are demanding a quick solution for the situation. So thank you, Abdullah Sabah from Kuwait. My question is about the Syrian crisis for Dr. Nouf. Is the Latin America still have relations with Syrian government, or they are solidarity with the Gulf countries? As far as I remember, I think there is a support for the UN resolutions, but I don't have information if there are secret relations with the regime in Syria.
هل لا زالت موجودة؟
لا أعلم عن هذا الشيء.
تفضل. Do you want to answer?
Well, the issue is that they are, it's like if you are the countries, the GCC countries intervene in Latin American politics? Do they say something about what is going on with the Dilma impeachment? No. So we are just so apart, okay? And of course they do work in favor of human rights. They do work in favor of United Nations resolutions, okay? And this is where they stand. In some occasions, rare occasions, like Lula Initiative, on United Security Council for the resolution of Iranian crisis, but it's rare that the countries of the region will take political stances because it's out of their reach. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. شكرا.
Thanks very much for the three speakers. Thank you for your presence. We would like that those who are traveling now, because of the arrival of the President of Saudi Arabia, so try to leave early so to reach the airport on time. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for the speakers, and see you next year. Bye-bye.